This is going to be the Halloween special Mummies from Olivia Sarcastic Productions. I've been looking forward to this because it's a freaking episode on mummies, man. Also, it's one of the Halloween specials. OST, wow. OSP does. So it's probably going to be good. Also, Red, when she does Halloween, is one of the best things possible. So we're going to jump right in and see where this goes. And by goes, I mean me probably geeking out. Yeah, that's never happened before. Let's get started.
If you're feeling spooky, then we've got the pins for you. Osiris and Anubis are available in our merch shop for a limited time.
They put him in the freaking Yamcha pose. I mean, it makes sense considering his history, but still, wow, they did him dirty. Almost as dirty as literal, actual mythology.
Link below.
What's that exotic smell in the air? That intoxicating blend of spices that conjures up visions of distant wonders and treasures untold? That's right, it's pumpkin spice season, and it's high time we use this glorious Halloween special to unpack the last of the great classic keystones of horror.
Wait, this is the last one? Oh, I mean, I'm watching them out of order. That's on me. Also, I feel called out because I'm the guy who gets pumpkin spice.
And unpack might be slightly on the nose phrasing, because today's very special guest star comes to us straight from the deepest, driest tombs. We've talked about Dracula, Frankenstein, werewolves in the broad and specific, and now it's time we round out the cast with some royalty. Today, we're going to talk about
the others actually not about.
And joining me on this new one.
Blue was willing to join her on this. Oh.
And multifaceted topic with a trail of historical context 5,000 years long. Here to share the stage with me is the cerulean storyteller himself, your co-host and mine, Blue.
I know we both have a reputation for idiosyncratic speech patterns, but why on earth are you talking like that?
I've been reading a lot of 1800 spec fic for this, and I have learned to never use one word when 15 will do.
You know, that tracks.
So, let's start with the easy parts. The concept of a mummy as a monster is, in its current form, pretty easy to explain. Long ago in ancient Egypt, someone got mummified, which was happening a lot back then. And now, in the exotic surroundings of current time and place, the mummy is reawakened. After this point, interpretations vary somewhat. The classic image of a horror movie mummy is a shambling, zombie-like undead, swathed in bandages, but otherwise not particularly distinct from any garden variety walking corpse.
Ooh. Also, yeah, for some reason my audio got really quiet for a second there. Weird. That is such a cool image. I know it's the one they use on the thumbnail, but it's so cool. Just like the shambling corpse with all the bandages around it. Again, when Red does creepy, she does it really well. Not Netrix level, absolutely terrifying beyond all reasonable doubt, but pretty close to that in a less absolutely batshit insane required method.
Minus the contagion element that's a staple of modern zombie media. These zombie-type mummies basically look the same in and out of the sarcophagus. However, mummies contain multitudes, and some mummies shed the wrappings and rehydrate into revitalized images of the shape and power they once held in life. Where mummies still in their original packaging are generally portrayed as near-mindless, basically zombies, mummies that moisturize are much more powerful and intelligent, and typically
rehydrate, dressed to impress, as smart as they were in life. Usually a powerful sorcerer with tremendous magical... They're talking about the mummy movies, aren't they? Reassembles an unhealthy but alive person, usually a boss antagonist with minions and such. Still in their original wrappings, nearly mindless, typically not contagious, but still very deadly. Resembles a walking corpse, typically a minion serving some sort of boss and controller. Oh.
Typically supplement their undead sturdiness with a broad swath of sorceress powers. But the fascinating thing about mummies in media is that the tropes about them were developing in parallel to the actual discovery and decipherment of ancient Egyptian writings about it. There was a starting foundation of basic knowledge that was broadly accessible to Western audiences courtesy of ancient Greeks like Herodotus, a historiographer who...
Oh, this is from Herodotus? For anyone who isn't aware, Herodotus' thing is... While the word history is based on his name because he wrote down a lot of things and, you know, it's credited with being history, guy made up shit. A lot of shit. Like, if we did it now, calling it nonfiction would be probably challenged in court. But at the time, it was still way more accurate than anything else, as in there was literally nothing else that we would know about because maybe it did exist and we just don't know about it because old shit does that.
Wrote up some detailed and genuinely pretty accurate rundowns of the mummification practiced in the neighboring land of Egypt, and the various big-name gods they favored. But he pointedly skirted around the issue of why everyone was getting mummified. What did they hope to achieve with this careful preservation?
Why would they do all that work after they're already dead? What are you, a cop? So he gets to the practice, but not the religion behind it. Okay.
Of their dead. Before hieroglyphs were deciphered, nobody in the western neck of the woods really knew. And as a result, those early mummy stories are pretty lacking in actual ancient Egyptian concepts of the soul, the afterlife, and the spells required to safely transfer one into the other. All these writers knew was that Egypt was full of intricately preserved dead people laid to rest in massive, near-impenetrable edifices. And that's the kind of concept that sets the creative gears spinning.
So to understand the development of the mummy in fiction, let's wind our way back to the start and trace the tale of the phenomenon we can call egyptomania. Herodotus' early travel...
Wait, egyptomania? For some reason, I know we're talking about Herodotus right now, which is ancient Greece, but I have a feeling that this is going to be more relevant to modern day stuff. Maybe in the 1900s? Maybe.
Travelogues are all well and good, but the first OSP certified Egyptomaniac was Rome.
Really?
Oh, that's BC. The Romans saw Egypt as the last missing piece of their pan-Mediterranean empire.
We're just going to ignore this part of the country. Or, well, continent. Otherwise, yeah, it would be the last piece. Oh, hey, would you look at that? 30 BC.
As the biggest breadbasket in the Eastern Med and a legendary source of
Really?
wealth, it was an indispensable part of the Roman world, but it also made...
I love all my provinces equally. I do not care for Belgica? Belgica. Oh, probably Belgium.
For a pretty slick trophy Rome could brag about. In the century after its conquest, Rome expended considerable effort to import Egyptian obelisks as spiffy new monuments, and one hotshot Roman built himself an entire pyramid in the city. The agenda...
No, let's go back. Seriously? That's in Rome. Okay. I mean, I know the Romans' idea of art was literally stealing it from other places and just dropping it down because they were artistic vandals, essentially, but... Well, technically not vandals, just art thieves. Vandals were destroyed, but... Does that look tacky to anyone else, or is it just me?
The agenda of all that Egyptian iconography was hardly hidden. Egypt is a part of Rome. This is ours now, but it's telling that Egypt got more fanfare than other newly conquered territories.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, the loss of Egypt to the Muslim Caliphate in the 600s stung far worse than when Italy went split-seas in 476.
Oh.
During the Renaissance 1,000 years later, renewed interest in the classical world in general and the glories of Rome specifically meant a small but notable curiosity in Egypt.
Also,
in the
it had a
1600s, Roman architects
yeah.
rekindled their zest for obelisks and pyramids, and German scholar Athanasius Kircher took a crack at translating hieroglyphics.
Oh,
His efforts didn't...
They've been trying since 1600s. Because the breakthrough was the Rosetta Stone tablet, yeah.
Go anywhere, but they set off a broader push to understand this exotic and mystical world on a deeper level than raw aesthetics. But the more they learned, the more questions they had, and that only added to the mystique. As academic interest grew, Egypt and its iconography took on different meanings for different groups. In the 1700s, the Freemasons co-opted Egyptian symbols as a source of wisdom, hence motifs like the very non-American pyramid on the $1 bill. This
Yeah, because most of the people were part of the cult. And by cult, it's not really a big deal. Technically, my father-in-law was in it. They had requirements for public service that he couldn't match, so he had to leave. Apparently, it's a lot of public service requirements right now. I don't know what it was like at the time, but it's like 6 hours a week. And if you have a full-time job, it's just a bitch to do.
This was one way to signify being a worldly free thinker, willing to step beyond the comfy Western norms. And by the very end of the century, Egypt gained a pointed political significance in revolutionary France. As Foreign Minister Talleyrand said, Egypt was a province of the Roman Republic, she must become a province of the French Republic. The logic there is more than a little flimsy.
Really? France tried this? Honestly, I was expecting it to be the English. Just ignore the pesky detail where Egypt only became part of Rome under Augustus, by which point it was very much an empire. Oh, yeah, that would do it.
But the message was clear enough. 2 months later, in April 1798, France formed an army of the Orient under General Napoleon.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Grab it. General Nappity-Bappity had a grand old time conquering Egypt, but unbeknownst to him, this little jaunt would completely transform Egypt's place in world culture. During some fort renovation near the port city of Rosetta, the French army discovered a giant slab of rock with inscriptions in...
Oh, that's when they found the Rosetta Stone. Oh, I wasn't aware that it was that long ago. For some reason, I thought it was in the 1800s, not... Actually, it's Napoleon. That very well might be the 1800s.
3 languages: hieroglyphs, Egyptian Demotic, and Greek. The stone dated back to the Ptolemaic period when society was multilingual in Greek and Egyptian, so the hope was that each inscription was actually the same text in different languages.
And it was.
That meant a translation of the Greek would reveal exactly what this wall of hieroglyphs said. And
it wasn't an exact match, as the top portion of the original Egyptian is completely gone, but the section that survived provided plenty to work from. Ooh.
There, they just have to break it down to understand the component pieces in Demotic and hieroglyphic. This was a gateway to finally understanding what the hell all those hieroglyphs were saying. The Rosetta Stone's decipherment was a very alluring goal, and it soon became a microcosm of egyptomania as a whole because the Rosetta Stone itself wound up in London. The British muscled France out of Egypt in 1801,
knew that would happen.
Before the Ottomans in turn muscled Britain out in 1803, the Brits shipped a bundle of treasure off to London, including the stone. They plonked it in the British Museum and made prints of the text to distribute to scholars, which facilitated the collective translation effort.
The British, also known as, it belongs to the museum, specifically ours, away from anyone who actually owns it.
But Egypt had more to offer than just linguistic enlightenment, and the prospect of eminently stealable, shiny artifacts was too alluring to ignore. So in the ensuing century, interest in Egypt would become far bigger and far more lucrative than mere academic linguistics. Still, the decipherment of hieroglyphs was a high priority, and
Okay, I'm just going to say it. It's been on my mind this entire time. I'm a little disappointed he has the S for Superman instead of a B for Blue on here. It feels like he's missing out on an obviously good choice here. A bit disappointing, you Blue. For the admittedly completely accurate, but not entirely best, completely random choice that a guy on YouTube would make without ever any input being necessary or required or cared about.
got its share of time and focus. It was hardly a casual process, but over the next 20 years, an international assortment of scholars tried their hands at deciphering it. One critical discovery in the process was the confirmation that a cartouche signified royal names like Ptolemaios and Cleopatra, which allowed Jean-François Champollion to assemble an alphabet of phonetic hieroglyphs, and in 1822, the code was cracked. There was still plenty left to decipher from the massive trove of documents and inscriptions spread across Egypt, and they still hadn't figured out biliteral signs or phonetic complements or determinatives yet, but this was the turning point where scholars actually had a shot at understanding what they were reading. And beyond the realm of hieroglyphics, archaeology was making some important leaps forward. In the decade after the Rosetta Stone, Britain employed the unmatchably stylish Giovanni Belzoni to excavate sites across Egypt and export whatever could fit on a boat.
Damn. That is a beard. I'm sorry, I'm having a bit of beard envy. God damn.
Over to England. His team uncovered the temples of Abu Simbel and the tomb of Seti I in the Valley of the Kings in 1817, leading to numerous detailed schematics and drawings for publication.
Wait, shit, that's the actual schematics they took at the time? Holy! I've seen schematics that are a lot newer than this, and they do not look nearly so accessible as this option, showing the pits, the construction, not why we have the pits at the time, but this is brilliant. Even got some of the colorization down.
And an entire exhibition recreating Seti's tomb in the recently constructed Egyptian Hall in London.
That's
in 1815,
so cool.
His team successfully acquired a bust of Ramses II, which inspired Percy Shelley to write the poem
Acquired. It's obvious because, again, it's British, but it needs to be said at least once. And I'm sure it has, but I'm going to do it anyways.
Ozymandias, what with the lone and level sand stretching far away and such. Then in 1821, he performed the first public mummy unwrapping in London, but hold on to that thought because we'll pick it back up later. Not to be left completely in the dust, France in 1821 acquired the Dendera Zodiac, a bas-relief from the ceiling of a temple depicting a complete Egyptian star map. Not bad, not bad. This was all part of an archaeological space race to claim Egypt culturally, if not territorially, through scholarship, artifacts, popular enthusiasm, and good old-fashioned stealing stuff.
And let's be honest, it's mostly the stealing stuff. It's completely the stealing stuff. It is all the stealing stuff. It's like Egypt's been played by grave robbers, specifically all of the English and the French.
And in the game of excitement, boy oh boy did Britain have it. Writers, historians, artists, architects, and the general public alike devoured incoming material and even went to Egypt themselves to learn more and draw inspiration. Early in the process, John Martin's 1823 Seventh Plague of Egypt is a gorgeous architectural mega landscape of an Egyptian city, depicting the familiar Bible story with a power, terror, and vastness that had never been seen before.
And including the pyramids in there so people would know the location. You don't have to tell people what it is, because if the pyramid wasn't there, you'd think, maybe this is Rome. Maybe this is somewhere in Babylon. No, pyramids, Egypt. And it's really freaking cool. I love it's the exact opposite of God Race. It's probably water falling down. You could see the light in the distance. Sorry, I really geek out over art sometimes.
In the minds of the English populace, ancient Egypt was coming alive and becoming very, very real.
As Egyptomania gripped the English-speaking world, art was imitating life, and the first appearance of a proper reanimated mummy came to us in 1827 in a novel written by Jane
The
C.
Mummy,
Loudon, appropriately titled The Mummy, A Tale of the 22nd Century. This is a little bit false advertising, as while the story does contain a mummy, it is for the most part a sci-fi political thriller set in the distant year of 2126, where England is an absolute theocracy embroiled in a succession crisis after the assassination of the Queen. And
seriously? That actually sounds like most novels we get now. Huh.
Also
the obvious part about English writing about a succession crisis between queens. That's never happened within the last 5 years of when this had been made.
there's a mummy. I'll spare you guys the full rundown because frankly the book is really long and contains soap opera levels of convolution, and if I'm being completely honest, I skipped over the middle third of it once it became clear that the mummy was not going to be a factor. But we don't really need to focus on that because we're here for mummies, and mummies we shall have. This mummy is none other than the builder of the Great Pyramids, Cheops, the Hellenized form of the name Khufu, which was at the time the more popular way to anglicize it. The mummy—
Wait, why would they? Really? They said Cheops spelled Cheops to get Khufu. That doesn't... Why? Why is everything on fire? Mummified with all organs intact, which is definitely not how that works. Revives with faculties intact and not happy about it. Reawakened by science through magic is implied to play a role. Motivated to seek redemption for fictional wrongdoings in life. Yeah, from what little there is known about Khufu and his son Khafre, believing they did wrongdoings would definitely be inaccurate. Let's put it this way. You don't build pyramids to your greatness and then build a bigger one. Or sorry, a smaller pyramid to your father and then a bigger one for you if you think you've ever done anything wrong in life. Actually not evil, just scary and pretending to help the villains. Wait, pretending? Oh. No magic powers, just strong. That actually sounds kind of cool. And makes me regret that the villain is, well, less of the mummy in it.
Mummy is perfectly preserved with all his organs intact, which is not at all how that works,
no, they
but
removed
is
that
going
shit.
to be a common feature in future mummy narratives. And he's reanimated movie Frankenstein style using the futuristic galvanic power of electricity. And upon being reawakened, Cheops revives with all his physical and mental faculties intact and a healthy dose of powerful existential dread at being unceremoniously ripped from the sweet insensibility of the grave and thrust into a horrific industrialized future of fire and steel. However,
because this would have been during the 1800s, so it would have been even more so what they think the future is. Oh, yeah. Because the paradise option of bright, shiny, colorful glass everywhere wouldn't be what they think the future is. It would have been industrialization at the hardest part. And the queen going, taking the throne by force has brought me nothing but grief. And him going, imagine that, because that's literally Egypt's history, yeah.
Despite being utterly terrifying, Cheops turns out to actually be a good dude who's trying to redeem himself for crimes of passion committed in life, namely the murder of his own father when he objected to Cheops committing the terrible crime of romantically pursuing his sister. The fact that this is framed as some unthinkable horror instead of a thing that ancient Egyptian royalty did constantly and openly is an interestingly telling bit of context for what was and wasn't common knowledge.
Let's be completely fair. They're saying it's just Egyptian is kind of hiding the fact that it's not exactly, let's put it this way. There are plenty of European families that were royal and their family tree looked like a circle. Multiple circles. A lot of circles. There was, yeah, it wasn't just the Egyptians.
Knowledge at the time. I'll consider it a mercy they hadn't yet figured out the family tree for the Ptolemaic Greek dynasties because yeesh. It's also worth noting that while the mummy's revival was theoretically done through science, the end of the book strongly implies that it was actually the will of the gods that gave him this second chance at redemption, introducing a theme in mummy media that the Egyptian gods still hold real and present power.
While the writers were revving their engines and speculating.
Actually, that's kind of fascinating that they would take that in an 18th century work, considering I don't think this was the most welcoming time for alternative religions. So implying that would have been quite fascinating and because it would have been shocking to the reader, not just an interesting footnote. So they probably did it for that very reason, to offend the sensibilities in such a way that makes it more interesting. Yeah, that makes sense.
Circulating their fictions, egyptomania continued to trundle along in the background, and nothing was more inspiring to the artists and writers of the day than a slate of brand new visual glimpses into what this ancient world actually looked like. The 1840s saw the publication of a 3-volume collection of written history and stunning prints of architecture and landscapes across.
I'm going to be completely honest. I would love to get a book with these prints. Sorry, prints of crazy existing places are always one of my massive weaknesses. They're so cool.
Egypt called Sketches of Egypt and Nubia. It was a noted favorite of Queen Victoria, as well as a touchpoint to all its readers for a grounded historical understanding of Egypt. While this is logically the opposite of quasi-mythological ghost stories, all this was the essential foundation that interest in mummies was built on, and the critical flavor text that made these stories really hit.
As Egyptomania tightened its grip and the study of Egyptian history and hieroglyphs gained clarity, more mummies started popping up in literature. In 1840, the short story The Mummy's Foot was published in a French magazine about a young man who buys a preserved mummy foot to use as a paper.
The fuck? Do you think it'll make me seem weird? She was about to say paperweight, didn't she? Oh. Who could possibly think this is weird? And they have a mummified heart, shoes, more feet. So the plotline of the story is a guy knowingly bought mummified feet. It wasn't like it was a surprise. He wasn't sure what it was. Like, he actually was like, ooh, feet. Let's take... Yeah, okay, never mind. I've been on the internet long enough to know exactly what kind of person this is. Good to see that wasn't a new invention, and it's been like that for a long time. Oh, lovely.
Paperweight, only to have an extremely vivid dream where the spirit of the princess whose mummified foot he now owns appears to try and reclaim her foot. When he
Uh-huh. Last night I dreamt I held you in my arms. Yeah, and he's been carrying your foot around, which is creepier. Also, Xeon Dragon gifted 5 memberships. Thanks, man. That's awesome.
Foot. When he returns it to her, she flies with him to Egypt to meet her father, but he's tragically told that their whirlwind
You want to what? You'll be dust before you hit 200. I mean, yeah.
relationship is doomed because the age gap is just way too problematic. I mean, she's 3,000 years older than him. Our hero wakes from the dream but finds that the mummy's foot has been replaced with the princess's amulet, making him wonder if it was truly a dream after all. So this mummy story is less of a
Yeah, never mind. It is exactly the kind of degenerate you expect to see online, but in fancy Victorian, let's call it writing. It's not just a feet fetish. It's dead feet fetish. Oh, that's just... If only a Frenchman would save me. An ancient princess, not reanimated mummy, just spirit hunting a piece of her own body. Protagonist helps her, but with unfinished business. Appeal is all a dream. Or was it? Wants to smooch the mummy. Yeah. Yeah.
Animated mummy situation and more a ghost story with extra steps. Instead of the mummy waking up and walloping anyone, she's just bound to her body in a spiritual sense due to some unfinished business. But this wasn't the only kind of mummy story going on in the 1840s. In 1845, everyone's favorite gothic horror icon, Edgar Allan Poe, got in on the fun with the
Dear God, Xenodragon. Membership for 23 months. Also, considering the level you're at, goddamn. So what month? 3D printed figure area? Oh, Xenodragon, yeah. It's going to be the... Rogues and Hunters. I have a test print right now for a hunter figure and a rogue. I'm not really sure which one it is, but double barrel archer. So far at 28mm, looks good. I might scale it up for sending it out because, frankly, even though the resin I have is bendy, I don't want to put that through shipping. So yeah, I'll put up more about various images later.
Short story, Some Words with a Mummy, and we can expect nothing less from the master of the macabre to take the concept of a reawakened ancient corpse and use it for comedic social commentary.
What?
Okay. Some Words with a Mummy is about a...
I'm sorry. What? I have to have misheard that.
For comedic social commentary.
Edgar Allan Poe did comedy. Not what I was expecting to hear, and that's why she put it in, but, yeah.
Okay. Some Words with a Mummy is about a perfectly preserved mummy, mummified again with all his organs intact.
Zap me one more time, see what happens. I don't know why, but for some reason I'm reading him as Samuel L. Jackson. But there's not one motherfucker in there for that to be the case. And too much hair.
Unwrapped, reawakened using the futuristic power of galvanic electricity again, and immediately being peeved off about the unceremonious treatment and profoundly unimpressed with the accomplishments of modern-day America. 90% of the story is a lengthy argument between the revived mummy and the crew of mummy aficionados about whose culture is superior, with the scales coming down heavily in favor of the extremely technologically advanced ancient Egyptians, who extended their already multi-century lifespans by perfecting the advanced scientific technique of embalming themselves alive into basically stasis. At the end of the story, our narrator resolves to have himself mummified for the next 200 years because his life isn't all that great, and he's curious to know who will be president in 2045.
At the time of recording this, it is November 2nd. This joke makes me jealous of this guy.
Both, buddy.
Meanwhile, back on the historical end of things, the decipherment of hieroglyphs was chugging along with the release of a preliminary translation of the Book of the Dead and an extensive Egyptian dictionary in 1867. But as the century progressed, Egyptomania also began to take physical shape in Britain. Architects were taking inspiration from Egypt as early as 1812 with the construction of the Egyptian Hall, but by the mid-century, exhibitions like the Egyptian Court at London's Crystal Palace in 1854 showcased Egyptian artifacts in lavishly reconstructed environments. It's one thing to see the Rosetta Stone in a deliberately plain museum setting, it's another thing to walk into a whole-ass temple. The Egyptian court was part of...
Holy shit, they actually found a picture of it! Whoa. Sorry, I am massively geeking out over reconstructions of historical locations. I used to work at a museum in Oakland, specifically Pittsburgh in Oakland. There's a place called Oakland in Pittsburgh. It's weird. But part of the room is a reconstruction of a French church's front, and it's gorgeous and beautiful, and done at a time where Carnegie could actually buy a church's front temporarily, ship it across the ocean, make a cast of it, and then ship it back, because he could do that with the money of, I'm wealthy enough that you're going to say yes, and no one is going to gainsay me. That's not a joke either. That's literally how it happened.
Of the Great Exhibition of the Works of All Nations, as clear a sign as any that Egypt was firmly in Britain's cultural pantheon. Even when public buildings weren't trying to concoct entire Egyptian environments, they could still pull on Egyptian style just for funsies as part of the general architectural design language.
Also, Shadowblazer, you're asking, they did a reconstruction. Did they understand the cultural nuances? No, of course not. But it was so beautifully well preserved that when the actual face of the church was destroyed by acid rain because the area was absolutely toxic, they were able to restore the front of the church based on the cast that was later taken. Even though it was a cast of an already slightly broken version, it was in such better shape that they could do restorations based on it.
Temple Mill Works is a simple flax mill, but when they built it in 1836, Egyptomania was already sweeping the island, and they made it look Egyptian because why not?
That's impressive.
It's cool.
Terrifying.
And in an obvious pairing of design and gnarly edgelord vibes, many upper-class Victorians chose to bring the aesthetic to the grave, styling their headstones and mausoleums with Egyptian motifs.
This is one of those things where I'm not a big person to explore graveyards, but this would still terrify me. It would be really cool, and I would be terrified.
A pervasive cultural fixation, Egyptomania had even the most minute applications, inspiring home furniture decorations as well as personal fashion. Gentlemen kept their cigars in boxes decorated to look like the Book of the Dead, which is a hilarious unintentional anti-smoking statement, and excavated jewelry inspired an abundance of Egyptian-styled regalia. Now, with so many Egyptophiles out there, you know that people would get gate.
This is where the scarab brooch came from, huh? Yeah, that makes sense. It's where that entire style started. I've had multiple people, and for some reason, one teacher in college who was absolutely obsessed with them. So they just found hundreds of them. They had a new one every day.
Keepy about it. Short of a time machine, there's no way to ever prove this, but I can so vividly imagine some hoity-toity archaeology nerds seeing a woman wearing a scarab necklace and scoffing, "Oh, you're not even a real fan. Literally named 3 pharaohs." It's fundamentally unprovable, but come on.
I mean, theoretically, that's easy. It's Khufre, Khafre, and Cleopatra. Also, you could throw in Osiris because technically he's supposed to be a pharaoh as well, but also whatever.
You know.
Mimicking the style and art of ancient Egypt in the context of non-ancient Britain was all well and good, but there was a pervasive and inescapable presence haunting the narrative, as it were. And that's the fact that ancient Egypt was full of ancient Egyptians, usually mummified ones. And it was pretty clear in the literature of the era that the fact
Sorry, every time OSP does anything with history, or Simon Whistler's channel for that reason, and you see the bits where they've made the accessible parts of the mausoleums, or sorry, the pyramids accessible. Even though this is heavily touristicized, or touristicized? I have no idea if that's the right word. This is so cool.
The fact that these striking edifices had people in them, people that those buildings and symbols and spellbooks were actually made for, was kind of coming across as more of a problem than a core feature of the entire concept of a tomb. In 1869, we got another fun little jaunt into the world of fictional mummies with the short story Lost in a Pyramid, or The Mummy's Curse, one of the earliest examples of the concept of a horrifying curse befalling someone who desecrates the mummy's tomb.
And this was then picked up on later when they found the older mummy tombs that had the curses in them, but was actually just the air was toxic because they were buried, and what little bacteria was in there made it absolutely unbreathable. So people exposed to it would get 100-year-old diseases that at the time would not be worth noting, but for us, we had no immunity to, on top of literal toxic air.
And this harrowing tale could only be written by the true grand dame of horror, Louisa May Alcott, the author of Little Women. The story is short.
What?
True grand dame of horror, Louisa May Alcott, the author of Little Women.
Okay, so far we've had 2 literary what the fuck moments. The author of Little Women did horror, and Edgar Allan Poe doing comedy. Wow. Next you're going to tell me Lovecraft did romantic literature.
The story is short and sweet. A dude tells his fiancée the story of how he acquired this beautiful little golden box of mysterious seeds by getting lost in a tomb and burning a mummy for a handy-dandy smoke signal.
Yeah, and people have mentioned in the comments that when the British were in Egypt, they took mummies and burned them to fuel riverboats. Yeah.
So, on account of it having been burned to a crisp, there is no reanimated mummy in this one. Boo. But there is a curse. Hooray! Apparently, the mummy was a powerful sorceress who laid a terrible curse on anyone who disturbed her body, but
yeah, you kind of earned this one.
Sure, it's fine. His fiancée saves one of the seeds and grows it in secret as a fun surprise for their wedding.
Oh, that's terrifying. Almost enough to distract from your inexplicable ailment.
Day, although she just can't seem to shake this this mysterious illness that's been haunting her lately. And she wears the flower on their wedding day, which turns out to be a bad idea, shockingly, when he finds her that evening collapsed and catatonic, withered into a living corpse by the cursed flower. So while the story does contain a...
Can't say I didn't warn him. Nameless sorceress, not a reanimated mummy on account of being on fire, but she has protected her afterlife with a curse. The curse is non-magical, but still very potent. A horrible fate is inflicted on the trespassers. Yeah, note to shit, don't burn people's bodies.
Mummy's Curse, it's a lot less overtly supernatural than most later incarnations of the format. Still, there's a vibe taking shape here, a slight inkling that maybe, just maybe, digging up and desecrating these mummies might be bad. And if that is bad, well, maybe there could even be consequences.
As we've seen, the
Victorian England talking about consequences. I'm sure they ignored that context.
Victorian fixation on Egypt had a lot of different venues and applications, from scholarship to literature, art, architecture, fashion, and more. But what we haven't yet addressed is what they did with mummies. See, the remains of the ancient dead had a distressingly non-zero number of uses in an egyptomaniac society.
Oh, no.
Back in the Renaissance, Europeans, from scientists to royals, were known to eat mummified remains as a medicine, but the practice had sharply
You know, I like it when I was just making jokes about the British cooking being bland. Not the sprinkling of cannibalism. This is not even a joke. Also, I'm not sure if you could hear that on the mic, but the cat is at the gate and they're being cute. And it's adorable.
Fallen in popularity in the 1700s. In the Victorian period, they were no more respectful of the dead, but at least less overtly cannibalistic about it, as mummies were used as firewood,
British cannibals, got it.
ground up into pigment for a paint called mummy brown, and served as the main entertainment at parties. Our old pal Belzoni and his surgeon assistant first unwrapped a mummy as part of an exhibition in 1821.
They painted with dead people. When Soylent Green was too on the nose. Also, Pilo, you're mentioning, I did not know about the mummy meds. I don't even know you're joking at this point, and for all I know, you're not. Oh, God.
And in the decades after, his assistant
Really
saw
stare at the dead
absolutely
people.
no reason to stop. The man in question, one Thomas Pettigrew, further popularized the mummy unwrapping party, where he'd unwrap and autopsy the mummy for a spectacle at public events and private socials under the scalpel-thin guise of scientific inquiry. We've seen this pop up in some of the stories we've broken.
Also, everything he just said is not an uncommon thing now, because there are, and this is not a joke, companies who do scientific autopsies for paying customers to come watch a person's corpse that was donated to science be exhumed and autopsied in a theater. Again, paying customers. It is literally a show of autopsying a dead person who gave their body to science because they are sold, used for entertainment, and everything right here is still a job that exists now. You can look it up. I hate this. I hate this so much.
Down, but it was beginning to fall out of style by the end of the century. Not out of any sense that this was a horribly disrespectful
He's wrong about that. It didn't fall out of style. It's still going on.
thing to do, but because eventually the spectators got bored when all the wrapping was gone and it was just a dead guy on the inside.
Yeah, that's the difference. Though. It's the wrapping part that stopped. The exhuming dead people for fun is still going on.
Didn't even get up and do anything spooky. It's no wonder that the writers of the era
God, they're both
started
there.
getting more creative with the possibilities of what an enterprising Englishman might do with the mummy given the right fictional tools.
And so we get another mummy story in 1892. This one from Arthur Conan Doyle, of all people.
Really?
In lot number 249, we
Holmes.
get possibly the first instance of a zombie-type shambling mummy. And not just that, this one is also reawakened by magic in the form of a papyrus scroll of spells. Our narrator is, in true Doyle form, a young heroic doctor bearing bemused witness to the shenanigans of an eccentric genius. Only unlike the ever-lovable Sherlock Holmes, this eccentric genius is a jerk using the power of
I must partner myself with a man of ambition. Only power can match my indomitable mind. And the guy's going,
exotic mysticism to revive a mummy and use it as a hitman to exact vengeance on his schoolyard rivals. This
Oh, got it. Nothing better than a cold drink after a hard day of bullying. Bully.
mummy is very strong, but seems basically mindless, with no evidence of thought or willpower of its own, and it ends the story pretty unceremoniously. Our hero gets sick of the shenanigans and threatens the eccentric genius at gunpoint until he
Bellingham, I have had just about enough. Yes, the bodies are of too much now, and I might be in trouble. Authentic 1872 gun. Okay, I'm gonna burn the body. Ignore the fact that I've literally committed murders.
destroys the mummy and burns the scroll. At this point in history, the noted fragility of mummies was pretty well tested, but in contrast to every real mummy that was unceremoniously cut apart and burned, this one maybe kind of deserved it. In 1903, another familiar name enters the ring. Bram Stoker, the
They're starting to try and climb over the grate. They're distracted by my wife's office, but the kitties are still looking at the grate and trying to see if they can get over it by stretching a bit. If they get in, I will hold one of them in front of the camera.
Dracula man himself wrote The Jewel of Seven Stars, a full-blown novel about a mummy. The book has two different endings, one original from 1903 and an updated one in 1912. But to be frank,
why?
I don't really like either of them, because this is another mummy story that just...
Queen Tara, mummified with intent to be resurrected, but laid in an cursed tomb to keep her dead. Buried with a magic box to bring her back, and protected by her tremendous magical powers, has been reborn as the book's heroine, and exerts a growing influence over her mind. Distressingly good at murder, doesn't get reanimated. Boo. Oh, so she just comes back anyways, despite being dead.
refuses to give us an actual revived mummy. However, it does lay down a lot of very interesting concepts that we start seeing more frequently later on. For one thing, this mummy does have a curse on her tomb, but she is not the one who put it there. In life, the mummy Queen Tara was a powerful sorceress who transgressed every rule, including gender roles, and took power that the priesthood wanted for themselves.
I mean, that last part happened a lot during ancient Egypt because the priesthood and the pharaohs were constantly pulling back and forth to see who has the most power, and the tombs versus the religious complexes surrounding the tombs were power plays by both sides at different times.
After her death, the priests laid a curse on her tomb.
Although there were female pharaohs, so the gender role would be more of an English thing than an actual Egyptian thing.
Decrying her as a blasphemer who defied the gods themselves, a trend we will be seeing a lot going forward. All of this feels like a moderately sensationalized version of the life and death of Queen Hatshepsut, whose tomb had been unearthed by Howard Carter earlier that very same
Probably
year.
very much
However,
exactly that,
in the
yeah.
wonderful world of fiction, Tara also made arrangements for her own revival in some future distant land, far to the north, where she can pursue freedom and true love. And she has a habit of magically entrancing or murdering people who are getting in her way of doing that. True.
It's like, I'm going to be free and find true love and murder people. Okay. Does she die and then reanimate herself with her own corpse? 2 for the price of 1. I'm sure there's a perfectly logical explanation. Nope.
Love notwithstanding, this is all very sinister, and it gets more sinister when it becomes clear that Margaret, the demure and innocent love interest of our narrator, is Queen Tara's reincarnation, who is also being increasingly influenced and borderline possessed by the awakened consciousness of the dead queen. Tara's not really the uncontroversial antagonist of this story, and she's framed in a very sympathetic light at several points, while the protagonists work to complete her resurrection scheme in pursuit of science and knowledge.
Wait, the protagonist is trying to revive the person who's technically already alive. But, I'm not going to think about this too hard because technically her succeeding plan already, succeeded because she's alive again. Bringing the body back to life wouldn't matter because she's already got one.
Concept that fucking with a mummy was maybe kind of disrespectful and invasive is actually directly addressed in this story, as Margaret strongly protests the unwrapping of Queen Tara in a room full of dudes who can't stop gawking at how hot and naked her extremely dead body is.
Okay, yeah, I'm glad they called out the gawking on dead bodies is creepy, but also I'm just going to lie to myself right now and say that is an old-timey thing that definitely wouldn't happen now. Okay. Also, the entire chat just wants me to boop the snoot of the kitties. Oh, they're curled at the foot of it. Oh, it's adorable. And Triss is staring directly at me, wanting in. The cat is staring at me because they want in, but they can't get over the grate and they're pissed. Oh, no.
However, in both endings of the book, the magical resurrection just straight up fails. Tara doesn't get revived in either version, and her body disintegrates both times. However, in the 1912 version, it is strongly indicated that she lives on in a new form as Margaret, her reincarnation. And through her marriage to narrator boy, she gets that true love she wanted all along, which is something, I guess.
Oh, so the entire thing of knowing it was her was not from the beginning of the book, so you only found out later that she had technically already got what she wanted. Okay, that makes more sense. So it was the ending that clarified it.
Too much to ask for a little girl boss mummy murder action? I don't think that's too much to ask. I support women's rights and women's wrongs.
Isn't that basically just the Underworld movie series?
Is it too much to ask for a little girl boss mommy? Whoa, whoa, boss. What?
God damn, Red. I mean, I'm pretty sure people keep saying that she's asexual and she's going for mommy action. That is a Freudian slip if ever there wasn't, definitely one, but it's a very interesting one that people will make fan art of.
An important bit of context here is that Bram Stoker did his goddamn research. He was up to the minute on his Egyptology, and it shows. He doesn't just describe the artifacts accurately. He doesn't just describe the hieroglyphs correctly. He also goes into depth about the concept of the ancient Egyptian anatomy of the soul. This is huge, because up till now, it has not come up at all in Mummy.
So the guy who probably did the most, informative writing to the public was the guy who wrote Dracula. Honestly, it seems like this should be a piece that'd be, if it had a better ending, more influential.
media. But the ancient Egyptian afterlife was a complicated affair, and so was the concept of the soul and of death. The structure of it varies somewhat depending on where and when you are. After all, ancient Egypt was around for 3,000 years, and that is a long goddamn time. But in the general terms, as Stoker would have been taught, the ancient Egyptian concept of the soul was subdivided into several distinct parts. The Ka is the primary one, a vital life force or essence that animates the person and leaves the body after death. It's portrayed in hieroglyphs as upraised arms, and it needed to be maintained after death through offerings. The Ka is the most commonly name-dropped part of the soul in Jewel of Seven Stars, and
so it's not so much that they reanimated, it's that there's parts of the soul they reanimated separately. And the life force for the offerings was the part that was still with the old body. Okay. And Stoker would go over this in explaining why there were multiple parts. Oh. This is actually really fascinating. Also, there are a lot of fingers on that hand. 6 of them. Oh, it's like the 6-toed cats down in Miami. Sorry, Key West.
Stoker equates it to an astral body that can separate itself from the mummy and move around, eavesdropping or even telekinetically manipulating stuff. It also seems to be possessing, or at least influencing, the female lead of the story, Margaret. But the Ka isn't the only key component of the soul. There's also the Ba, represented as a human-headed bird. The Ba is clearly somewhat separate from the person it belongs to. There's an actual ancient Egyptian story about this called The Dispute Between a Man and His Ba, where a guy has a full-blown argument with his own Ba because he's depressed and suicidal and longing for the eternal paradise that awaits him when he's dead, and his Ba...
Oh, why can't I just go to the Duat now? Because I will slap you in places you didn't know you had places.
calls him a dipshit.
Also, they're saying 7 fingers in the book? Oh, thumb would be the 7th. Yeah, I refuse to count that as a finger, so that makes more sense. I got it, Zeno.
And threatens to leave him if he doesn't shape up. Anyway, Stoker also name drops a couple other key concepts. The Ib, or heart, which was crucial to preserve during mummification since it had to be weighed against a feather to judge the person's worth.
Wow, he's really... I'm actually respecting Bram Stoker a lot more. I thought he was a decent writer already, just didn't do stuff I was interested in, but I didn't realize he was this detailed in actual usage of mythology. Wow.
Ren, or name, which was extremely important because if the name of the deceased was expunged from record, they would die a second time, and he even mentions the shoot, or shadow, another slightly vague and confusing part of the person's unique identity. However, one interesting thing is missing from Stoker's rundown of the structure of the soul, namely the Akh, a spirit created through a ritual that reunited the Ba and the Ka into an entity that could travel freely between the worlds of the living and the dead. The bulk of Egyptian funerary literature was basically how to become an Akh after you bite the big one, so this is an interesting omission.
After the translation,
and you can actually see the combination of the symbols there as well. Oh, because the wings for the arms upraised, the head of the bird, so the main part. Oh.
After the translation of hieroglyphs in the early 1800s, most of Egyptology was expanding on existing knowledge and capitalizing on popular enthusiasm, but it had been several decades since a truly transformative development in the field.
So
At
what
the start
happened?
of the 1900s, we got it. First came the aforementioned discovery and excavation of Hatshepsut's tomb in the Valley of the Kings. The valley was an old standby for royal burials in the New Kingdom period because, unlike making an obvious mountain
Gold, 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 right here. First come, first serve, don't miss out. Because the top of the pyramid was supposed to be capped in gold, and that's all gone. Also, it would have been alabaster covered the entire way down, so it would have been gleaming white. And probably very hard to look at in the sun, which is probably intentional.
sized advertisement to please rob here, tombs cut into the walls of the valley were a little better hidden. Not hidden perfectly, as it didn't stop most of these tombs from being looted during antiquity, but they're
Well, that's kind of debatable, because most of them being looted implies that most of them are known, and they're probably mostly looted. But we keep finding more, and there's, I think within the last 10 years, a few that were found that were completely untouched and are absolutely pristine, but are being very slowly investigated because they are absolutely pristine. Oh God, I just saw a video about this from Simon Whistler, and I completely forgot the name. Damn it.
relative concealment at least kept the tombs untouched since the ancient period. And in the case of Hatshepsut, the 3,000-year-old thieves did the courtesy of leaving behind the mummified remains of two women, one of which was the femme pharaoh herself. It took another century to actually confirm that ID, but members of the public like Mr. Stoker were nonetheless certain to be following the news with immense interest. But this left egyptomaniacs wanting, because they'd still yet to find a truly intact royal burial, undisturbed by ancient grave robbers or their Egyptomania-era successors. However, in 1922, everything changed emerged when Howard Carter dug around the tomb of Ramses V and VI. Beneath that surrounding rubble and a layer of alluvium deposited by ancient flooding, they found something. A single stair step on the valley floor. Now, the sides of the valley had been thoroughly unearthed.
The thing is, I know I've heard Howard Carter's name before, but I am pulling a massive blank. And it's actually kind of bothering me because this is fascinating to me and I do not remember.
Earth to the point that the previous excavation sponsor called the dig site exhausted, but no one had.
That's an actual picture of the guy? Goddamn, it's pretty good. I fear the Valley of the Tombs is now exhausted. It's still not now, dude.
Seriously dug into the valley floor. So clearing the staircase and working down, they came upon a tomb which prior archaeologists theorized about, but given the valley seems to be all dug up, assumed couldn't actually exist. See, excavations in the decade prior had turned up scattered artifacts with the name Tutankhamun, an obscure pharaoh of medium consequence, notable mainly for undoing the monotheistic swerve of his father Akhenaten, and not known for anything else. And wouldn't you know, that's exactly whose name Howard Carter found inscribed on the roughed up but still sealed door to the tomb.
Dude, this is so cool. Also, Sam Eddings, thank you very much.
Reaching the seal with a tiny hole in the corner of the door, Carter and his sponsor, Lord Carnarvon, peered.
This photo is from later openings to the sarcophagus, but it's got the right energy, so we're going to pretend. Okay, makes sense.
Through with the flicker of a candle to find, quoting Carter, as my eyes grew accustomed to the light, details of the room within emerged slowly.
Really? Freaking Skyrim background music? Okay, yeah, it makes sense, but still.
Slowly from the mist, strange animals, statues, and gold. Everywhere the glint of gold. What lay inside in that antechamber he first peered into and beyond was a tomb untouched since antiquity, full of all manner of genuine artifacts from the New Kingdom period. Egyptomania had thus far feasted on ruins and scattered artifacts, but this was a—
Wait, they made a reconstruction of it? Oh, that would be so cool! The boats, the cats, more boats, more boats, more boats, more boats. They had a lot of boats. Granted, boats were a major part, I think reed boats specifically. Oh, I would love to see these reconstructions because going to the actual tomb would involve way more travel than even going to London would take.
Royal treasure trove, and it came at the exact time the world needed. 1922 was, for you math fanatics out there, 4 brief years after the end of the First World War and 2 shorter years after the Great Influenza epidemic. Everything's—
Oh yeah, we had another 20s period that was a giant plague. It's like they come on a schedule or something.
Sucked, and people wanted anything to be excited about. It was something unambiguously nice and fun and interesting and
Visitors viewing the work site as objects are transferred from the tomb to inspection at work. Oh, can you imagine how cool that would be? Just to be there and watching as completely unearthed artifacts that haven't seen the light of day for thousands of years are just being carted out from a place that no one thought even existed until it was discovered. I would definitely be one of the gawkers going, ah! The entire time. Yeah, I'm not proud of that, but I'm definitely that idiot.
Exciting that everyone could just enjoy after a decade of war and influenza and boundless suffering. King Tut, as his name came to be abbreviated, was a brief flash in Egyptian history during his life, reverting his kingdom's religion away from Atenist heresy and back to the polytheism we're familiar with, and then dying before turning 20. But his afterlife would prove among the most consequential in all of Egyptian history.
It's crazy how the most important thing he did was in death, which is actually completely ironic considering the religion placed so much emphasis on death itself that it's kind of works. Also, Summer Cogs, thank you very much.
If the 1800s were Egyptomania, the 1920s were Tutmania.
So I know I've been doing a lot of weird name dropping in this.
Okay, I just realized how long this video is, and I probably should finish this next week because there's so many other things I wanted to get to, and it's already been over an hour. That said, this is so cool. So we will finish this one next week. Guys, check this video out. OSP, red and blue together are doing such a cool job for the literature and the history of it. And I love this. This is what I wanted to see more. Red and blue combining the literary and the historical aspects to get this much interesting knowledge. And I'm freaking out, man. If we ever do get to the diatribes they do, I am going to have a massive geek session. And I mean, I will completely love it. And I'm not going to deny that in any way, shape, or form. Also, Giotto Cook, thank you. I probably butcher your name, but thank you all the same. So for now, I'm going to cut this one here. You guys know the deal. Link below, video, hit it up.